The black void of space was shattered by the blistering, incandescent arcs of alien plasma fire, streaking through the ether like furious lightning. The battlefield, an expanse of debris-strewn orbit above the shattered planet Caltharian, was a tableau of annihilation. The Ulsar Dominion's warships, sleek and bristling with weapons, swarmed like a school of predators closing in on their prey, a battered human fleet that refused to die. On board the UHS Resolute, Captain Elena Markov stood in the dimly lit command center, her face illuminated by the flicker of failing systems. Her uniform, torn and streaked with soot, bore testament to weeks of relentless combat. Around her, the bridge crew worked feverishly, their movements sharp despite the exhaustion carved into their faces. The ship groaned as another plasma volley tore through its flank. "They're closing in, Captain," said Lieutenant Oren, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Hull integrity at 18%. One more hit like that? We won't give them the satisfaction." Elena cut in, her tone steady and fierce. She stared at the tactical display, a grim constellation of red markers converging on the last human stronghold. Beyond the viewport, the human ships were a ragtag ensemble, freighters retrofitted with railguns, frigates held together by makeshift repairs, and drones operating on scavenged programming. In contrast, the Ulsar fleet was a masterpiece of technological superiority, each vessel a testament to millennia of domination. The Ulsar warlord, Commander Vrelkar, watched from his flagship. His multi-lensed eyes narrowed in condescension as he observed the human resistance. To him, they were pests, fragile, chaotic beings who clung to life like weeds on a dying star. Their resilience was admirable, he admitted, but ultimately futile. "Prepare to deliver the final strike," Vrelkar commanded. His voice carried the arrogance of an apex predator certain of its prey's doom. Humans are a lesson in hubris. Back on the Resolute, Elena gritted her teeth. "Oren, open the comms, fleet-wide." "Yes, Captain." Her voice rang, out, defiant and resolute. "This is Captain Markov. We've come too far, lost too much. They think this is the end. Let's show them what humans do when we're backed into a corner." The bridge erupted in cheers as the crew prepared for the impossible. The void of space was an unforgiving witness, yet it bore silent testimony to humanity's defiance. The Caltharian system had once been a thriving hub of interstellar commerce, its rings sparkling with trade vessels and its atmosphere glimmering with the auroras of a young star. Now it was a graveyard. The Ulsar Dominion had reduced the planet's surface to ash, its cities crushed beneath the relentless onslaught of orbital bombardments. The once proud Terran fleet had dwindled to a handful of desperate survivors. But still they fought. On the Resolute, Captain Elena Markov reviewed the fleet's meager status on a cracked tactical display. Of the 50 ships that had jumped into Caltharian to protect the colony, only 6 remained. Most were barely spaceworthy, held together by the ingenuity of human engineers and the raw determination of their crews. The Resolute itself was little more than a shell. Hull breaches were sealed with scavenged plating, engines sputtered with failing reactors, and ammunition stores were yet, even as their numbers dwindled, the humans held their ground. Elena's sharp steel-gray eyes scanned the room, taking in her crew. Lieutenant Oren, a wiry young man with a knack for turning broken systems into miracles, was hunched over the engine controls. Beside him, Ensign Nia, fresh out of the academy, worked with hands that trembled slightly but never faltered. Elena knew what they were feeling: fear, exhaustion, desperation, but also the quiet fury that bound them together. Her gaze hardened. They'd die before they surrendered. Aboard the Ulsar flagship Dreadsong, Commander Vrelkar observed the battle with disdain. His species, a towering insectoid race with chitinous exoskeletons and multifaceted eyes, was the dominant power in this quadrant of the galaxy. Their military strength was legendary. Their conquests spanned centuries. To Vrelkar, this skirmish was little more than pest control. "They persist," noted General Threx, his subordinate, with a hint of disbelief. "Human ships are crippled. Their ammunition is nearly exhausted. Yet they continue to fight." They are primitive, Vrelkar replied, waving a claw dismissively. An inferior species compensating for their weakness with desperation. It will not save them. Still, there was something unsettling about the humans. The Ulsar were no strangers to resistance, but no other species had fought with such reckless abandon. Most folded after a decisive blow. The humans, however, seemed to thrive in their hopelessness. Vrelkar's eyes focused on the Resolute, the largest and most heavily damaged of the remaining human ships. What drives them? He mused aloud. It is illogical to continue. They cannot win. Back on the Resolute, the answer to Vrelkar's question was as simple as it was profound. Survival. Humanity had learned the hard way that existence, in a galaxy teeming with hostile powers, was not guaranteed. Every battle, every sacrifice was a declaration that they would not be erased. For Captain Elena Markov, it was personal. She had been born on Caltharian, a third-generation colonist. She had grown up under its twin moons, learned to navigate its sprawling trade hubs, and seen her parents work tirelessly to transform a barren rock into a thriving world. Now those moons were obscured by fire and debris, and her parents were among the millions lost when the Ulsar attacked without warning. This isn't just about Caltharian, Elena said, addressing her bridge crew. This is about every human colony out there. Every child who dreams of the stars, every family that deserves a chance to live without fear of extermination. Her words were met with grim nods. No one had illusions of survival, but their fight wasn't for themselves. It was for what humanity represented. The Ulsar, in their arrogance, had always underestimated humanity. They saw humans as physically frail, technologically inferior, and hopelessly emotional. They failed to see the strength in those very traits. Where the Ulsar valued efficiency and dominance, humans found power in adaptability and creativity. Where the Ulsar enforced conformity, humans thrived in chaos. This cultural divide was exemplified in the Ulsar's reaction to human tactics. The humans had turned salvage into strategy, repurposing debris into makeshift mines and converting civilian freighters into mobile weapons platforms. It was madness to the Ulsar, a chaotic, inefficient mess. But it was working. Vrelkar's mandibles clicked in irritation as another Ulsar warship fell victim to a human ambush. A frigate, its hull patched with scavenged plating, had feigned retreat before detonating its engines in a brilliant explosion, taking the larger Ulsar destroyer with it. What species wastes its own lives so recklessly? Vrelkar hissed. We do not surrender, and we will never forget. The Ulsar commanders dismissed it as futile bravado, but as the battered human fleet rearranged itself into a wedge formation, Elena smiled grimly. Let them underestimate us, she thought. The humans had one final move to play, and it would ensure that no species ever again doubted their resolve. The battered human fleet, little more than fragments held together by ingenuity and stubbornness, surged forward. At the heart of the formation was the Resolute, its engines straining to maintain speed. Plasma fires crackled along its hull, and the occasional spark flared as life support systems fought to maintain integrity. To an outside observer, it seemed like an act of desperation. To the Ulsar, it was utter madness. Captain, the fleet is in position, Orin reported, his voice tense but steady. He gestured to the tactical display which showed the remaining ships moving into a spear-like formation aimed at the largest Ulsar vessel, the Dreadsong. Elena nodded, gripping the edge of her console. Good. Signal the others. No deviation. We stick to the plan. On the bridge of the Dreadsong, Commander Vrelkar studied the human fleet with a mix of amusement and disdain. The humans' defiance had been impressive in its way, but it was futile. The Ulsar fleet was 3 times their size and armed with weaponry so advanced that humanity's technology seemed laughable by comparison. Even in their strongest moments, humans were nothing more than a nuisance. Prepare the fleet to crush their formation, Vrelkar commanded. His tone was dismissive, as though he were ordering the disposal of trash. General Threx hesitated, his antennae twitching. "Commander, their trajectory, it is highly irregular. Their lead ship is venting atmosphere, and their flanking vessels are barely operational," Vrelkar interrupted. "They're desperate. Let them come." But Threx's unease grew as he observed the humans' movements. It wasn't chaos. It was precision disguised as recklessness. He turned back to his superior. "Commander, I recommend a more cautious approach." Vrelkar's mandibles flared. "They are cornered animals. Do you fear a cornered animal, General?" The truth behind the human strategy was far more complex than Vrelkar could imagine. Every ship in the fleet had been retrofitted with scavenged parts, their systems running on jury-rigged power supplies. The crews had worked tirelessly, often in zero gravity and near-freezing temperatures, to prepare for this moment. They knew the odds, but they also knew the stakes. Humanity's survival depended on their success. As the Resolute led the charge, Elena's voice crackled over the comms. "Remember your roles. This isn't just about us. This is about everyone back home who's counting on us to hold the line. We do this for them." On the Wayfarer, a cargo ship turned warrior, Captain Amir Hossein adjusted the settings on his vessel's makeshift railgun. The weapon had been assembled from mining equipment and scrap metal, but its payload was a deadly alloy designed to penetrate even the Ulsar's advanced shields. "Ready to fire on your mark, Resolute." "Hold position, Wayfarer," Elena replied. "We need to get closer." As the humans advanced, a small but critical detail escaped the Ulsar's notice. Scattered throughout the debris field were clusters of salvaged drones, each one dormant and undetectable. Months earlier, human engineers had covertly programmed these drones to respond to a specific signal. Now, as the Resolute reached a critical point in its charge, Elena gave the command. "Activate the swarm." The dormant drones whirred to life, their lights blinking in unison as they sprang into action. They moved like a flock of birds, weaving through the debris field with remarkable agility. Their purpose was simple: disruption. "Our targeting systems are failing," one technician shouted. "Impossible!" Vrelkar snarled, his mandibles clicking in frustration. "They don't have the technology to—" "They do now," Threx muttered under his breath, his earlier unease now fully justified. The Ulsar were quick to adapt, their warships redirecting firepower toward the drone swarm. But this momentary distraction was all the humans needed. The Resolute and its fleet closed the distance, their weapons blazing. What they lacked in sophistication, they made up for in sheer audacity. The Wayfarer struck first, its improvised railgun firing a single precise shot. The projectile ripped through the shields of a Ulsar cruiser, tearing a gaping hole in its hull. As the cruiser erupted in a plume of fire and debris, the humans cheered. "That's one down," Amir shouted. "Let's see how many more we can take with us." The Ulsar responded with overwhelming force, their lasers slicing through space with lethal precision. The Endurance, a human frigate, took a direct hit, its hull splitting apart in a fiery explosion. But even as the ship disintegrated, its crew managed to launch a salvo of torpedoes, taking another Ulsar ship down with them. For the first time, Vrelkar began to doubt. The humans' tactics were unconventional, bordering on suicidal, yet they were infuriatingly effective. Their ability to repurpose debris, manipulate the environment, and exploit the Ulsar's overconfidence was unlike anything he had encountered. "These primitives," he muttered, watching as another human vessel rammed a Ulsar destroyer, crippling it in a spectacular collision. "They fight like they have nothing to lose." Threx turned to him, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the chaos outside. Perhaps that is their strength. As the battle raged, the humans deployed their trump card, an experimental weapon cobbled together from salvaged Ulsar technology. Dubbed the Starbreaker, it was a massive energy cannon mounted on the Resolute. Its power source was unstable, and its accuracy was untested, but it was their only chance. "Elena, this is suicide," Orin warned as he calibrated the weapon. "If this thing backfires—" "It won't matter," Elena interrupted. "If we don't use it, we lose anyway." The Resolute maneuvered into position, its crew bracing for the recoil. "Target locked," Oren announced. "Fire," Elena ordered. The Starbreaker roared to life, its energy beam cutting through space like a blade. It struck the Dreadsong, bypassing its shields and slicing through its hull. The flagship shuddered as secondary explosions rippled across its surface. On board, Vrelkar was thrown from his command platform. Sparks rained down as systems failed one by one. "How?" he rasped, his voice filled with disbelief. Despite the success of the Starbreaker, the human fleet was on the brink of collapse. The Resolute had expended its remaining energy, leaving it adrift. One by one, the remaining ships began to falter under the Ulsar's relentless assault. But their sacrifice had bought time. On the Wayfarer, Amir transmitted a final message to the fleet. "Keep fighting. No matter what happens, we've shown them what we're made of." As his ship detonated in a brilliant flash, the crew of the Resolute watched in silence. The cost was staggering, but the Ulsar fleet was in disarray, their confidence shattered. On the crippled Dreadsong, Threx watched as the surviving human ships regrouped. Despite their losses, the humans had won the psychological battle. They had turned their desperation into a weapon, their ingenuity into an advantage, and their resilience into an unbreakable shield. "Commander," Threx said, turning to Vrelkar. "Perhaps we underestimated them." Vrelkar said nothing. For the first time in his long career, he felt something he had never associated with humans: fear. The battlefield was a chaotic expanse of fire and debris. Shattered remnants of both human and Ulsar ships floated in the void, glowing faintly against the backdrop of distant stars. The air on the Resolute's bridge was thick with tension and the acrid smell of burning circuits. Despite the odds, the crew had one final shot at victory, or at least survival. Elena wiped blood from a gash on her forehead, her hands trembling, as she gripped the command console. The Starbreaker had drained the ship's power reserves, leaving the Resolute adrift. The remaining human ships circled defensively, using whatever munitions they had left to keep the Ulsar at bay. "Oren, status report," Elena demanded, her voice sharp despite her exhaustion. "Main systems are offline. We've got minimal life support and no weapons," Oren replied. His hands danced over the flickering controls, trying to coax some life out of the ship's battered systems. "The reactor's cooling, but if we push it again, the whole thing could blow." Elena nodded, grimly. "And the fleet?" "3 ships still operational." "Barely." Oren hesitated before adding, "The Ulsar are regrouping. Their flagship is still active, but it's heavily damaged. If they strike again, we're done." On board the Ulsar flagship Dreadsong, Commander Vrelkar clung to a support beam as alarms blared around him. The once pristine control center was now a war zone, with cracked screens and shattered panels sparking erratically. Despite the catastrophic damage inflicted by the Starbreaker, the Dreadsong remained functional. Vrelkar's mandibles clicked in frustration as he surveyed the battle. His fleet was still intact enough to finish the humans, but the cost had been far higher than anticipated. Worse, the humans had proven themselves to be far more cunning and resourceful than he had given them credit for. "Prepare the final assault," Vrelkar barked. "They are weak. Crush them before they can regroup." General Threx hesitated, his multifaceted eyes scanning the tactical display. "Commander, their lead ship is defenseless, but the smaller vessels are moving into an unusual formation. They may have another trap." "I tire of your caution, General," Vrelkar snapped. "Deploy all remaining forces. This ends now." "On the eye." Resolute, Elena received the grim news as Oren monitored the Ulsar fleet's movements. "They're coming," he said, his voice tight. "This is their final push." Elena clenched her fists. Her crew had given everything, but they had nothing left to fight with. Yet surrender was not an option. If the Ulsar won here, humanity would be extinguished. She turned to her crew, her voice firm despite the fear in her heart. "We're not done yet. If we go down, we take them with us." "But how?" Oren asked. "The Starbreaker's spent and we're dead in the water." Elena's mind raced. The Starbreaker was useless, but the reactor still held potential energy that could be turned into a weapon. It was a gamble, one that would almost certainly destroy the Resolute, but it might be enough to cripple the Dreadsong and scatter the remaining Ulsar forces. "We're turning the ship into a bomb," Elena said, her voice cold and resolute. "The Mir." Crew exchanged uneasy glances, but no one protested. They had known the risks from the beginning. Oren nodded, his expression grim. Inside the Resolute, the reactor hummed ominously as it reached critical levels. Oren worked frantically, bypassing safety protocols and rigging the overload mechanism. "It's ready," he said, sweat dripping from his brow. "Once we trigger it, we'll have 2 minutes before detonation." "Understood," Elena replied. She turned to her crew, her gaze steady. "You've done enough. Get to the escape pods." "What about you, Captain?" Oren asked. Elena shook her head. "I'll stay. Someone needs to make sure this happens." The escape pods launched one by one, streaking away from the Resolute as it drifted toward the Dreadsong. The remaining Ulsar ships fired at the pods, but the human fleet retaliated, drawing their attention away. It was chaos, a cacophony of light and sound that drowned out the silence of space. On board the Dreadsong, Threx's unease grew as he observed the Resolute's movements. "Commander, the human flagship, it's on a collision course." Relkar's mandibles flared in disbelief. "They wouldn't." "They would," Threx interrupted. "They've turned it into a weapon." The realization came too late. The Resolute surged forward, its reactor glowing brighter and brighter as it neared critical mass. Elena sat alone on the bridge, her hands steady on the controls. Her thoughts drifted briefly to her family, to the planet she had sworn to protect. She closed her eyes, a small, bittersweet smile on her lips. "For humanity," she whispered. The Resolute collided with the Dreadsong, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, with a blinding flash, the overloaded reactor detonated. The explosion rippled outward, engulfing the Dreadsong and several nearby Ulsar ships. The shockwave sent debris hurtling through space, scattering the remaining Ulsar forces. On the human side, the surviving ships were thrown into disarray by the blast, but they were far enough away to avoid complete destruction. As the light faded, silence returned to the battlefield. On the bridge of the Wayfinder, Nadia stared at the display, her eyes wide with disbelief. Did it work?" Oren's voice crackled over the comms. "The Dreadsong is gone. Their fleet is retreating." A cheer erupted from the human crews. A sound of relief and triumph mingled with sorrow. The cost had been unimaginable, but against all odds, they had won. Far away from the battlefield, the escape pods carrying the Resolute's crew drifted toward the remnants of the human fleet. Oren sat in his pod, staring silently at the stars. He had argued with Elena, begged her to leave, but in the end, he had known she wouldn't. As the pods were picked up by the surviving ships, Oren whispered, "You did it, Elena. You gave us a chance." On Earth, humanity would learn of their victory and the sacrifices that had made it possible. They would rebuild, stronger and more united than ever before. And among the stars, the Ulsar would remember the humans not as prey, but as a force to be reckoned with. The battlefield lay quiet now, its silence broken only by the faint crackle of communication between the surviving human ships. The debris of both fleets drifted aimlessly, remnants of a battle that would forever be etched into the annals of human history. For the first time in what felt like ages, the stars were still. On board the Wayfinder, the surviving fleet's de facto flagship, Captain Amir stood at the observation deck, his face lit by the faint glow of the galaxy beyond. His expression was a mixture of relief and grief. They had won, but the cost had been devastating. Ships lost, thousands of lives extinguished, and the Resolute, along with its captain, reduced to nothing more than a memory. Nadia approached, her steps hesitant. "Captain," she said softly, "Oren's escape pod has been retrieved. He's asking for you." Amir nodded and followed her to the infirmary. Inside, Oren sat on a stretcher, his uniform scorched and torn, but his eyes sharp. He rose as Amir entered. She did it, Oren said, his voice hoarse but steady. Elena stopped them, gave us this chance. Amir placed a hand on Oren's shoulder. She was a hero. One of many today. The surviving ships regrouped, their captains convening over a secure channel. Earth had to know what had happened and what it had cost. Amir took the lead. This is Captain Amir of the Wayfinder, speaking on behalf of the human fleet. The Ulsar have been repelled. Their flagship, the Dreadsong, has been destroyed. We are battered, but we have survived. He paused, his voice growing heavier. Our victory was made possible by the courage and sacrifice of many. Most notably, Captain Elena Vargas of the Resolute, who gave her life to destroy the enemy flagship. She and her crew were the shield that kept Earth safe. The message was broadcast to Earth and the remaining human colonies. Across the planet, people gathered around screens, their fear turning to tentative hope. The name Elena Vargas would echo in their hearts, a reminder of the resilience of humanity. In the weeks that followed, Earth and the colonies began to rebuild. The Ulsar had retreated to their own territory, their fleet crippled and their morale shaken. Humanity knew they might return, but for now, there was time to prepare. On Earth, a memorial was erected in honor of the fallen. The centerpiece was a towering sculpture of a ship ascending into the stars, its hull emblazoned with the names of those who had sacrificed everything. At the base, a plaque read, "For the brave who faced the darkness so we could see the light." Oren stood at the edge of the crowd during the dedication ceremony, his eyes fixed on Elena's name. He clutched a small, worn data chip in his hand, a recording she had left for him before the battle. Later, in the quiet of his quarters, he played it. "Oren," her voice said, calm and steady, "if you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it, but that's okay. You'll carry on. You always do. Look after the crew and keep fighting for what's right. That's all I ask. And tell my family. Tell them I was thinking of them." Her words faded, leaving Oren in silence. He closed his eyes, tears slipping down his face. "I will," he whispered. "I promise." The battle against the Ulsar became a defining moment for humanity. Elena's sacrifice united the fractured factions of Earth, fostering cooperation where division had once reigned. Resources were pooled to rebuild the fleet, fortify defenses, and advance technology. Humanity was no longer content to simply survive. They were determined to thrive. Captain Amir took command of the newly designated human fleet, a coalition of ships from Earth and its colonies. Under his leadership, humanity pushed further into the stars, exploring and expanding, but always vigilant. Oren, now a respected engineer and strategist, worked tirelessly to ensure humanity would never be caught unprepared again. He carried Elena's memory with him, her voice guiding him in every decision. Decades later, as humanity flourished among the stars, the story of the Battle of Aegis Rift and the Resolute sacrifice became legend. Children learned of Elena Vargas in school, her name spoken with reverence as a symbol of courage and selflessness. On a quiet hill overlooking Earth's capital city, a lone figure stood before the memorial. It was Oren, now an old man, his hair silver but his eyes still sharp. He placed a small token at the base of the sculpture, a badge bearing the insignia of the Resolute. "Thank you, Elena," he said softly, "for everything." As he turned to leave, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sculpture in a golden glow. The stars began to emerge, their light a reminder of the endless possibilities that awaited. Humanity had endured, and they had Elena Vargas and countless others to thank for it. The future was theirs to write, among the stars where their legacy would shine forever.